Long time, 15 plus year paranormal investigator in the San Luis Valley, South Central Colorado, North Central New Mexico. I'm working on my 5th book. I've written 3 books on the San Luis Valley, and I do consider it America's most anomalous region in terms of documented variety and intensity of unusual occurrences. I worked with loosely with 5 county sheriff's departments, and was kind of the unofficial deputy for weirdness, for lack of a better term. And from 96, well actually 93 through 98, we had probably the most intense wave of anomalous activity documented anywhere in North America. And it just defied belief, really. I mean, every type of craft, aerial craft that you can imagine, every size, shape, speed, color, tons of military activity on the ground and aerial. Had many people in the south end of the valley from New Mexico, at least a dozen, call and report witches, and as orbs of light skipping across the prairie. The main reason I wanted to come here was to meet some of the Jicarilla Apache who live here, and reacquaint myself with the ex-lieutenant for the police force, Hoyt Velarde, who I did interview quite extensively back in the mid-90s. I wanted to reacquaint myself with Hoyt, supply some healthy objective skepticism relating to the Dulce base scenario. There is a facility here. It's not in Archuleta Mesa. It's probably west of town. And it is, if I had to put my best guess forward, of course I can't prove or demonstrate any of this, but if I had to guess, I'd say that it's some sort of nuclear weapons storage facility that is on the reservation because they couldn't legally have a facility like that in the United States. This is a sovereign nation. They can circumvent the laws of the United States by paying off the Indians and sneaking the stuff here. I encountered a Spanish-American, Hispanic hard rock miner back in the 90s who, his son was worked at the lab for 30 years, the Los Alamos lab, and his dad helped expand the lab underground and was an underground demolition expert. That's why whenever I talked to him, he was like, huh? Huh? He couldn't hear very well being underground blowing up dynamite for all those years. And he helped build a tunnel, he claimed, that went from Los Alamos up here to the Dulce area. He was only involved in the beginning portion of the construction, and it was his understanding that there was a nuclear weapons storage facility here. And that's why possibly you have elevated rates of cancer, environmental cancers here in the area. It's one of the highest rates, per capita of environmental cancers. So in answer to your question, I was here for a variety of reasons. Reacquaint myself with some of the Jicarilla who I know. Find out what kind of intelligence operatives would attend here. I've been taking notes on some individuals that are here. I like to watch the watchers, so to speak, and see how open the locals were to discussing this subject. They've been very closed off for years, and I think it's important for them to have some sort of recourse, a forum with which to present their questions and possibly obtain answers. Well, if you do your research concerning the Dulce facility that is now the stuff of legend in the field of ufology and the paranormal world, UFO buff world, if you do your research and you look online, read the books, there's not many, but there are some. Greg Bishop's Project Beta is one, which I applaud Greg's efforts. Very, very well done book. You start to see a pattern of disinformation, of certain names that have been associated with disinformation programs in the past, and you start to see a pattern of subterfuge of what could be called classic disinformation, trying to, get you to look at the left hand with the puppet on it, while the right hand is really what they're trying to hide. And it's a classic case of a bait and switch scenario, at least in my estimation. This is all, of course, just my opinion, but I think that there is, again, a facility here. I think it's run by the government. I don't think there's aliens here. I think that there's a good chance that there may be a possibility of an ancient antediluvian tunnel system in northern New Mexico. This old Spanish hard rock miner, underground demolition expert, claimed in the 50s, early 50s, while working, expanding Los Alamos underground, his team stumbled on an ancient tunnel system that appeared to go towards, one leg of it went towards Albuquerque, the other leg went towards Mount Taylor. They could tell by the amount of mineralization on the cave walls, which were obviously manufactured, that it was at least 10 to 12,000 years old. He didn't know exactly where it was going, but he knew it was up in the Dulce area. He didn't have an exact location, at least according to him, because he was only involved in the first part of it. But he found out through the grapevine that's where it was going. I would not have taken his story at face value and really, talked about it publicly, let's say, unless his son was a higher up at the lab, and I'm not going to divulge what his job was, but it was a very high visibility job, and he kind of went out on a limb by saying this. He told his family this originally, actually a couple of times, and then I was able to get the information through channels and got a chance to meet him. And he's from a very distinguished family here in New Mexico, so I'm a little reticent about divulging his name and the family's name, because if I did, you'd probably know who they were. So you hear stuff like that, then you start to think, well, maybe there is something underneath there, but I doubt that it's aliens, 18,000 aliens as the story goes, and Nightmare Hall with genetic experiments and vats of human, body parts and strange hybrid animal, Island of Dr. Moreau type experiments going on. I think a lot of that has been blown so out of proportion with the Benowitz material, what was his name, Thomas Costello and Krista Tilton and some of the early claimants to the base. I think a lot of that information has been taken and has become the stuff of legend and kind of fantasy, for lack of a better word. The new information that I've heard is the switch in the name, that the facility's under Mount Archuleta instead of Archuleta Mesa, which is the popular location that people cite as being the location of the underground base. And Mount Archuleta is actually about 18 miles west of here. And that makes sense, because a lot of the activity that was reported during the early 80s and even during the late 70s, 78, 79, seems to be centered west of here, not over Archuleta Mesa. It seemed to be around Trio Canyon area, Stone Lake, areas that are further towards Farmington. So that was interesting for me. I'd never heard that before. Going from here all the way over to Cimarron, Coyote Canyon over there, and then north into the San Luis Valley. This whole area is rife with highly unusual paranormal crypto creatures, dimensional portal type activity of translucent beings and creatures that don't seem to be fully manifest here. Legends and stories of flying seed pods and strange craft that go directly into mountains. There's definitely something going on here that does not involve the military, and I'll be the first one to admit that. I've just heard too many really good qualified witnesses talk about stuff that's physically impossible, at least based on our 21st century science. And some of the myths and legends of the native peoples here do kind of hint around at some pretty interesting phenomenal type events and just basic weird stuff. One of the phenomenal type events and creatures, if you will, that are not well known, that are pretty prevalent around here in this area is Bigfoot. From here to Fox Creek in the San Luis Valley is big time Bigfoot country. And Hoyt Velarde told me today, much to my surprise, that he estimated he'd been out on over 100 calls in his career as a law enforcement officer here, and showed me footage of what appeared to be a Bigfoot running across the road that one of the residents here had been able to get with a cell phone. And pretty interesting stuff when you hear a law enforcement official admit that they'd have had so many reports. And these particular creatures tend to be larger here for some reason. They've been reported up to 15 feet high here, which is really unusual. Usually Bigfoot are between 7 and 10, maybe 12 feet. Rarely do you hear of reports of them being bigger. And I investigated 7 Bigfoot sightings in the San Luis Valley that happened in a very short period of time, that as you throw a stone in a straight line, it's like 35, 40 miles from here. So This seems to be a corridor between here and San Antone Peak, which is right below the border of Colorado and New Mexico. The Taos Pueblo, the Tewa, have a tradition that says that Masa, the god of death, Creator's right-hand man, he lives in the mountain, it's the largest freestanding mountain in North America, San Antone Peak. And when he comes out to do things above ground, he's real big, he's real hairy, and he smells bad. So I find it interesting that the 7 Bigfoot reports that I had in 1 week all were centered around that area between San Antone Peak and the Conesus River on the border. And if you just go up and over the hill there, 30 miles, boom, you're going to drop right down into this area. So I think that's an area of investigation that's, I didn't realize, let's put it this way, that there was so much activity here. I knew there was some, but it seems that the locals are a lot more, it's easier for them to talk about Bigfoot than it is to talk about UFOs and talk about aliens. I've heard stories coming off the reservation here of ships landing and alien-type beings getting out and sitting down and talking with people around a fire. And you don't hear stories like that very often, and when you do, it's usually on an Indian reservation. My publisher said, why don't you do a book about skinwalkers? And I said, David, there's not enough material that you could gather, even if you worked at it for years, that would fill a book, because nobody's going to talk about it. It's probably one of the most taboo subjects among the Dina people, the Apache and Navajo. And I said, how about if I do a book on tricksters? Tricksters are found all over the world, from Loki in Scandinavia, Legba and Anansi in Africa, to the Dila, which creeps up underneath the bamboo slats of houses and licks people to death. And it's one of the least known of the mythical, archetypal forms that we have. Tricksters are older than the gods. Tricksters have the ability to shapeshift. They have the ability to change gender. They can be extremely profane and obscene and pornographic, yet at the same time they could be imparting some very important metaphysical, philosophical lesson by being profane. Look at the Heyoka, the clown, the thunderbird, the Iktomi, the spider. There's really interesting trickster forms, and nobody has really made an attempt to put them all together, see where the commonalities are, and then overlay that onto a trickster form for the 21st century. Skinwalkers are tricksters in that they have shape-shifting abilities, and shape-shifting is a major component to the trickster myth and to the trickster persona. And skinwalkers tricksters generally are not good, they're not evil, they just help shock us, break us out of our stasis, create novelty within a community, to pull the community forward, to impart important lessons. Skinwalkers do that, but on the negative side of the equation. And skinwalkers are very, very powerful Native American black magicians, if you will. And they're very real. And it, again, Ishalodadi, or whatever the Dene word for it is a word that you don't use around Dene people. They will recoil and they will not talk about it. And this is slowly changing, but they can be very tricksterish. They wear the skin of animals and can shapeshift into animals, and so they can trick you into believing it's an animal. They do very similar things to, for instance, in Whitley Strieber's book Communion, the knocking really quickly around his house. That's a common skinwalker technique for scaring people. And even though it's not considered by literal definition a trickster, skinwalker, a black magician, I think certain aspects of the occult, certain aspects of brujos and brujas, and even curanderas and healers, there is a little tricksterish quality in there that I feel is important. And I am going to be talking about that, but in kind of a separate sort of standalone context. So the skinwalkers are still around, and they're very powerful and very feared.